So I am so happy to have Greg Cendana here with us today to kick off our movement career stories. And so happy that Greg is willing to be, profiled for this to help drop some knowledge and share his experiences for all of you. So Greg, can you just start by telling me how you got started in movement work?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, thank you so much, Linda, for having me. And great to always be in community with you. So to your question, I say that I've been politicized by being raised in a immigrant, union, and Catholic household, um, where I struggled, but also grew fond of the multiple and complex identities that I have, and that I identify with. And I would say that it was in college where I felt like I could really put how I was politicized into action. It was a training that was sponsored by the United States Student Association and the local AFSCME union, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 3299, which was about students of color organizing in a post-affirmative action climate. And that was kind of what I think planted the initial seeds for organizing and really laid the groundwork for my career and how I have really looked at movement building and organizing as a core part of who I am.
That's wonderful. What was sort of the core appeal for you?
Well, I had come from high school and middle school in a school district that was extremely diverse. It was mostly Black and Latinx, and even the Asian Americans that were part of my school experience were mostly Southeast Asian. There were a lot of Pacific Islanders and even Native folks, and so I was lucky enough to grow up and to go to be in public schools that were truly diverse. And so when I actually went to UCLA, I was like, not all institutional places are as diverse as where I got to grow up and go to school at. And so that was one moment, or the one realization for me. And then the second realization was that as I learned more about the history and about how the impact of affirmative action had on UCLA was where I went, but also just the University of California system, there was a sharp decline in people of color, particularly Black students. There were some very staggering statistics. And for me, it was like, okay, well, how do we build power and organize folks who are here now, but how do we actually change the policies so that our classrooms, these institutions could better reflect the diversity of our state, of our city, however we want to look at it. And so that the notion of building power, the notion of collective power and organizing was really interesting to me. And I wanted to sharpen those skills, build those skills, and this was an initial place to do it. And as I went through the training and understood kind of how to build strategy, how do you even assess kind of who were the decision makers for some of these policies, whether it was like local, state, or federal, I really appreciated the intentionality that people were having in coaching me and helping provide opportunities for my further development. And I'm still very mindful of that now, and is why and is also part of why I'm so open to building and connecting with new organizers and new folks who are coming into the movement, because people were willing to nurture me and help develop and push me. And I think for that, it's it's my way of paying it forward.
Yeah, I love that. Full circle.
Yes.
So when you think back to some of those early days, Greg, what stands out to you as, the most rewarding experience?
Ooh, I think that there's so many, and to be honest with you, there's so many, but I think one thing that keeps me grounded is that I committed to being a lifelong student. I think there's an important humility that we must have as organizers, that we can learn from everybody that we engage, that we talk to, that we meet, that even if you've gone through multiple campaigns or multiple years of organizing, that you don't have it all, and that with rapidly changing climates, with new and enhanced tools for technology, that the ways we organize are also shifting, and how we organize are shifting. And so I think it's so important that people remind themselves and stay humble in that way. I would say, though, that some of the most remarkable and the most memorable moments have been when I've been with folks who have been the most marginally impacted, directly impacted. So one moment in particular is work when I was the executive director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. We did this effort, or partnered, or part of this coalition called Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders Behind Bars, which was really about addressing the mass incarceration of Asian Americans, particularly Southeast Asians, and South Asians and Pacific Islanders. And we actually, in partnership with the Asian Prisoner Support Committee, the Southeast Asian Resource Action Center, the National Education Association, and some other organizations, actually hosted a first ever convening of currently and formerly incarcerated folks in San Quentin State Prison. And I remember the closing speaker was a half Filipino, half Latinx person, sharing their experience. And they said that, you know, many of you all are going to have the chance to walk out of here after the end of this convening. And while the majority of us are in here for some more time. And so while we are excited that you are building with us, while we are excited that you are here to help us have a better, have a second chance or a third chance, the one thing I want to leave with you all is, can you help our children and help future generations have a better first chance? And for me, that still weighs heavily on me. And I think about that all the time, that yes, we believe in transformative justice. Yes, we believe in rehabilitation, but we actually have to, when we're thinking about the root causes, and when we're thinking about how folks get caught up in the school to deportation to incarceration pipeline, it starts somewhere, and we're schools funded appropriately. Was there enough resources for health and mental health programs and resources? And so for me, that's something that I still think about and continues to ground me in my work.
So really, really beautiful example. You mentioned your work with Apala, Greg. Can you tell folks who aren't familiar with sort of your career path, sort of the positions that you've held in your movement career?
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of full circle, like I mentioned the training that I did as a student with the U.S. Student Association and the local AFSCME 3299. And after graduating from UCLA, I actually organized with AFSCME 3299, which I then later became the president of the U.S. Student Association, which brought me to DC in the first place. After serving my term as president, I then became the deputy director, then the executive director of Apala. I did that for almost 8 years, and then decided to actually take my consulting firm full time, which now I'm the president and co-founder of Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting. One newer initiative that I'd like to lift up is also the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation. This was just started in March by myself and DJ Cutting Candy of the Asian Solidarity Collective. And it was started in response to the growing anti-Asian racism that was happening because of the racism and xenophobia from the current inhabitant of the White House and other conservative politicians and news folks. And we felt like it was important to not only address that, but also make sure that we were building cross-racial solidarity, and that people understood that the only reason why anti-Asian racism was possible was because of anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity, and that our struggles are all combined. And so we started and continue to see this as an important intervention, especially in the current moment of the uprisings and the additional support for the movement for Black lives across not only the United States, but across the globe.
It's really wonderful. I'll make sure to link the collaborative for folks to participate and join in because I know you have a number of really great upcoming events.
Awesome.
So, for someone who is new to movement work or are interested in exploring a movement career, what advice would you give them?
I love this question because I feel like I have a lot of ideas. So I'll give a couple. I think the first thing that I'll say is that it's important that you surround yourself by people who will nurture you, but also will challenge you. I think this looks like the form of mentors or femtors, as some would say. I think this looks at a community of practice, so other folks who are also trying to build similar skills and who want to work on similar issues or campaigns. And I think that it's important to also to talk and speak to our elders and folks who come before us. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and while there is still new paths to forge forward, that there's a lot that we can learn from folks who have different and other and more experience than us. And that for me has been a huge part of why I feel like I've been able to be centered and grounded in the particular ways, is because it was a priority for me to say, okay, well, who are other folks who have done this work that I can learn from and then make my own.
Yeah.
I would also say it's important to educate ourselves. And I think there's, that could look like listening to podcasts, reading articles, and in addition to these conversations and building with our elders and other folks who've come before us. I think there's an important part, there's something about us living in this technological world where people feel like they can just speed down through education and politicization. And that's just not the case. There's so much that we need to learn about history and herstory and what past legislation or what past campaigns, whether they won or lost or, they won partially, that we need to really learn from and dig from. And that's something that I've had to just be more conscious of myself. And even if that means having to slow down a little bit or not being able to get the particular result as quickly, but it's grounded in a different way, I think it's worth it. And I think last thing I will say is it's important to have fun and to not take yourself or the work too seriously. And I think it's important to recognize that this is about our lives and about our survival and about reimagining new worlds and new societies for all of us. But part of that for me has to come with love and joy and happiness. And so as I even think about my work and my organizing and even the healing that I have to go through, we need those moments where maybe it's not always about the campaign, or maybe it's not always about the policy, but that we are actually laughing, breaking bread, in my case, dancing, singing karaoke, right? And that those experiences are just as important, and that we need to make sure that we're creating space and building time for that as part of our collective healing, our collective spaces, so that that's integrated and incorporated into any of the work that we do.
Hear, hear. We don't focus enough on that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you're out there spreading that message, because our individual healing and well-being contributes to our collective healing and well-being, right?
Absolutely.
And just lastly, Greg, as we close out here, we're recording this in June of 2020, 3 weeks after George Floyd was killed by a police officer in Minneapolis. What are you sitting with today?
I'm sitting with the fact that we are in the midst of probably some of the largest uprisings that our country has seen. It's at least, for sure in recent history, but I also believe that this is just the beginning. I think that more and more folks are going to take it to the streets, are going to find more ways to be in solidarity, to declare Black Lives Matter, to support the movement for Black lives. And that's not just here in the US, but across the globe. I believe that there's going to be a critical conversation that's going to be had by non-Black people of color, white folks, about how we're being better allies, accomplices, and co-conspirators for Black liberation. And I think that there's also going to be a reckoning moment in terms of how do we actually, like, are the current systems and structures in place the ones that we need to bring us safety, bring us security, bring us happiness and joy that will allow us to be our full selves. And I would argue that there's going to be many people who are going to say and agree that we either need to create new systems or build things anew. And I think I think the one ask, or the one thing that I've been really telling people is, there's been a lot of focus on like the defund the police, a lot of focus on abolition. And I think that for me, this is an opportunity for us to really join. It's an invite to join in reimagining, re-envisioning, dreaming of the world and the world that we want to live in. And that part of the work is to actually say, like, what could I actually envision if we actually move let's use New York, for example. If we moved the multiple billions of dollars that went to the police, but instead moved it to housing or healthcare or education or employment or protecting the environment, like, what could that actually mean? And what are the things that we would actually love to see in, are there other ways, which there are, that we could actually support, provide resource to, and take to larger scales that will bring us to help us realize these visions and dreams. And so I'm excited about the principled struggle conversations that are ahead. I'm excited about the continued building and organizing that we have to do. And that, to remind folks that this is a process. Like, we're not going to see change in a week. We're not going to see change in a month. We're not even going to see all the change that we need to see over a year. That this is a longer term arc, that we have to be patient. We have to be flexible and nimble enough to be able to respond. But right now, in this moment, there's a lot that we can do to help us move in that direction.
Well, thank you, Greg. This has been just really enlightening. As always, I have, always been so inspired by your insight and perspective over the years, and I'm just happy to be able to share it with a broader audience, your words and your energy. So thank you so much for taking the time today, and hope you have a good rest of your week.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Linda. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to continuing to build.
Okay, sounds good.